Hey there, welcome to Settle for Three. Joey, along with Evan and Cameron. Thanks for coming back for another episode. This is a really exciting episode for one of us. It's the guy that's smiling on your screen. This is the Cameron rant episode. Cameron, you've been waiting to do this for a week, maybe longer. How are you feeling? Are you ready?
Months, years. Let's do it.
Okay. Evan, I'm a little afraid about what's going to happen
Um,
here.
yeah, we got to keep him in check
Okay.
this whole time.
We'll do our best, but I don't think people are keeping Cameron in check.
I don't know if I can
Some
get
things
his
are
way.
impossible. This may be pretty hard.
All
This is
right.
a this is a bit this is a big train that's moving. I don't know if we can stop it.
Okay, let's move on to the rundown for today since we got such a big show. We're going to go back through the first round of the college football playoffs. We just got a bunch of bad games, guys, but we got to talk about it. That's going to segue into a deep dive on the playoff selection committee and their selection processes. Cam's been going on the dark web, looking up information on all this stuff. Like he's really weaved a web to tell you why he thinks this playoff bracket doesn't work. And then we're going to finish off with the last word with a word from our friend Lane Kiffin. But first, we got to show you guys the playoff bracket. We are down to 8 teams, the Elite Eight. I don't know if you guys think these are the Elite Eight, but that's where we're at. And it was all chalk in the first round. So now we move the bowl sites: Peach Bowl, Rose Bowl, Fiesta Bowl, Sugar Bowl. And then the winners there will move on to the Orange Bowl. And what's the other one I'm forgetting? The Cotton Bowl.
So it is funny looking at this screen. The numbers are 1 through 8. That means 9 through 12 didn't win a single game. Why did we even have 12 teams in the playoff?
I think that's a fair point. I mean, could you make the argument that there's not 12 national championship worthy teams?
I think you could.
I mean, also, it's a really small sample size. Like, are you going to say that same thing 5 years from now? Maybe.
If they choose like this, yeah.
And here's all the only thing I got to say about that one is this is the first year, and it has also been the wildest year in college football that I can ever remember.
We got to talk about what happened this weekend. And I think we can all agree that the home games were a major hit. That was really exciting. We love seeing it. The games, on the other hand, were not. Let's start off with a battle of the Indiana, 10 seed Indiana, just absolutely demolished by Notre Dame. I mean, this one was only made close because Indiana scored 2 touchdowns in the final quarter. But Evan, this one was a dud, right?
Yeah, this one was just bad all the way around. The score 10-point difference. It might as well have been a 27-point difference. Not a whole lot to
Thank you.
say. Yeah.
All right, let's move on. The noon game on Saturday, that was 11 seed SMU at 6 seed Penn State. This one was awful, guys. I mean, this was a terrible game, 38-10. We had 2 pick sixes. It was 28-0 at halftime. Cameron, SMU didn't belong, and I think you already knew that before they played in this game.
Yeah. I think we could have said this about Indiana a second ago. There's a metric called strength of schedule. We'll talk a little bit about it more in a minute. That wasn't assessed when SMU was selected to play Penn State, who I think is arguably the number 2 or 3 team in the country.
I'll just say that this was the game I pointed to last week where I said technically by the rules that the playoff committee put out at the beginning of the year, they made the right decision putting SMU in, just not penalizing somebody for making the conference championship. But this was almost an exciting game for about 3 minutes at the end of the first half.
Yep.
That's about it. Yeah, Penn State's too good a team to be matched up against SMU.
The biggest debate I have is not whether Alabama should have been in. It's whether Alabama, Ole Miss, or South Carolina could have been better or more competitive in this game. I think any one of those 3 schools were more ready for this game and would have put up a significantly better fight against a very good Penn State roster than SGA was ready to do.
They just didn't change the playbook at all.
Yeah, all right, I totally agree. Moving on, 12 seed Clemson getting in just because they won the ACC. That's literally the only reason Clemson got in. At 5 seed Texas, Guys, Clemson covered the spread. It was 14 and a half. They they covered it. They had the lead. They had the lead at one point. Evan, I never really felt like Texas was going to lose this, even when they were down. But Clemson, honestly, like Clemson made them work for it. I thought Clemson did a good job of hanging in there.
Yeah, the question was never if Texas was going to win; it was going to be by how much.
Yeah.
I think when we picked these games last week, the spread was at 11, where we said that spread was way too low, and we were right in that instance. Dabo, he almost made it a game.
Yeah.
He's been there so many times, but as I pointed out to multiple people this week, Sark has also been there now 2 years in a row. He knows what he's doing. There's really no problem here.
Any thoughts, Cam?
The Texas roster is superior to the Clemson roster. That's what happens when you believe in the transfer portal.
Talent alone.
And I kind of think Texas came out with a little chip on their shoulder after the Georgia game, and they kind of wanted to say, guys, don't forget about us. We're still here.
No, nobody wants to play a pissed off Texas.
Yeah. Moving on to the nightcap, I think we all thought this was going to be the best game, and it was just an utter disappointment. I'm sorry, Evan. I mean, the Volunteers just didn't show up. But I want to start with Cam real quick because I know Evan has a lot to say. But Cam, there was a lot of debate between who was the 8th seed and who was the ninth seed. Do you think if these roles were reversed and Tennessee was playing in Neyland, that they would have won this game?
I can't say that they would have won the game. I think it would have been a closer game. I think it was Greg McElroy last season who said how hard and what the actual numbers were. I don't have them in front of me. But over the last 5-10 years, a top 10 team losing at home does not happen very often. And I do think it would have been a far more compelling game if this game was played in Neyland. I still think it should have been played in Neyland, especially with Ohio State losing to Michigan in their prior outing.
All right, I just want to ask one question, and Joey, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
Ohio State, what is their best win this season? Is it a close win over Penn State, or is it a blowout win in the playoff over Tennessee?
Penn State, because it was on the road.
Penn State beating a whiteout Penn State in Happy Valley. Really hard task to do. They won by 7, 20-13. Yeah, Penn State all day long. And Evan, you left out Indiana. How could a top 10 Indiana team not be in the, great echelon of teams that they've played this season?
Yeah, I don't know what
there.
I don't know what an echelon is, but they don't deserve to be in the top 3 wins for Ohio State, let alone the top 10 of all of college football. All I really need to say about this game is it was awful, just at nearly all levels. The only shining star for Tennessee in the entire game was Nico. Nico really tried to put that team on his back, but he got no help. The defense, who was one of the best defenses in the country, just absolutely fell apart. Running game just was not there. Ohio State was absolutely the better team. They went up 21-0 early, and a lot of people said the game was immediately over, but then Tennessee brought it back within 2 scores, but they just couldn't do anything after that. So every time they showed a flash of greatness, it just fizzled out and they couldn't get in the end zone. This was a bad game.
You guys ready to move on?
Yep.
All right. So for this portion of the show, I'm going to hand it off to Cameron because we're going to talk about the playoff from its infancy all the way to who's on the selection committee and how they pick their teams. So Cameron, why don't you just tell us where you want to start?
I'm going to go ahead and preface this. If you have a thought on this, I haven't heard or seen too many comments on who actually should be in the committee, who shouldn't be. Please comment on our YouTube channel or on our Spotify. We would love to hear your general thoughts on this. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the two of you. Did you two enjoy the first week of the 12-team playoff? Yes or no?
Yes, only from a standpoint of it was different and I didn't know what was going to happen, but the games were very boring.
even if we take the Tennessee game out of this, I did not enjoy it. I think I maybe enjoyed a total of 10 minutes of all of the games.
What was the biggest takeaway from this week's matchup?
12 teams is too much.
Okay.
Rules need to change. The selection needs to change.
The two comments that I have. So the average margin of victory this week was 18 points.
Oof.
We have a significant problem with the teams, not even going into the committee yet. We have a significant problem with who those teams are. We need to see the best 12 teams, not the most deserving. There is a very big delineation between those two, and you're about to hear me complain about it for the next few minutes. All right, so first and foremost, what is the college football playoff? All right, so the college football playoff is Division One. It was designed in 2014 as a 4-team playoff. For the last decade, essentially, we've actually competed in it. Over the last decade, we've seen, I think, a total of 9 teams that have actually made it in. So it's been pretty hard to actually make it into that. In the first year of the 12-team playoff, obviously, we had to open it up to more teams, so it's already been more inclusive. They succeeded in that regard. The problem is still the structure of the system that was made. One general note that I want to make here, though, is that the college football playoff is a completely separate entity from the NCAA. Alrighty.
That's a good thing, though, right? That's a really good thing.
Well, and also not only that, the other thing is the only poll that matters for 90% of the year is the AP poll, and that it completely switches.
Fair. I just think the NCAA has had so many issues in the past with things, more related to March Madness, that I don't mind that they're separate.
Joey, why do you think it's a good thing that they're separate? I'd love to pick your brain.
Just because I don't think the NCAA has shown a good history of making rules that are in the best interest of the game or the student athletes. I think they make decisions that are in the best interest of the advertising dollars.
That's what I was going to say. NCAA is a business like everybody else. They want to put in the teams that are going to bring in the most money.
But to contradict myself, we have a 12-team playoff because of the advertising dollars. I mean,
correct.
So I guess in a way I proved my point wrong. But anyways, Cam, back to you.
Oh, no, you're good. So the next thing I want to cover is how exactly these teams are selected for the 12-team playoff. I'm going to go ahead and preface this. If you question the integrity of a sport, this may be the best example of one to question. So basically walking through this, we have 12 teams as we know. The top 4 highest ranked conference champions receive a bye. Those are not the best 4 teams that actually exist. You can have a number 2 team that lost to the number 1 team in the conference championship, and they don't get a bye. They're ranked number 5. In this year's exact format, you can actually see a team such as Boise State, who is number 10, I believe, shift all the way up into that number 3 seed just because of how this works out. Now, the number 5 seed as well, the 5th conference champion will also be allowed in, and there has to be a representative from the G5, which is a group of 5 different conferences. I won't go through those 5, but that's kind of the intention or how these are built. Last but not least, depending on whether or not there is a G5 in those top 4 spots, you will see either 6 or 7 of the highest ranked teams that are ranked kind of power ranked in there. The reason that SMU made it in is because before the season, they said that a conference championship would not dictate that a team get left out. Mm-hmm. SMU lost to Clemson this year. Can we agree that SMU is not the better team and probably should not have been in the playoff?
Yeah, I agree. I think hindsight's 2020 as well, but yeah, I agree with you.
Yep. I think we had a pretty good idea as to kind of what was coming. And there's a part of me that's glad that we saw it the way that we did. All right. So the next thing that I want to cover is the criteria by which they actually select these. And I'm going to pick apart each and every one of these. So wins and losses. How many wins and losses that a team actually has? Now, the issue here comes in where teams have gone 13-0, winning a conference championship, yet they don't get in. 2023, Florida State Seminoles. Congratulations, you made your way into a video that wasn't depressing. So figured I'd go ahead and call.
So I do have one thing to say about that, specifically Florida State. So I went and looked up this criteria on their website, and the last option is other relevant factors such as unavailability of key players and coaches that might affect a team's performance. Now, my point is, I don't know when that rule was added in. I don't know if they picked Florida State and then added that rule in before this year. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Florida State, I mean, they went undefeated and didn't make it. So
Oh, I think they absolutely did it right after that Georgia State game. Yeah.
The vagueness that they leave it in no other sport, and we'll cover this a little bit more in a moment. In no other sport do we leave this up to the determination of individuals. Every other sport in the world, I don't care if we're talking about European soccer, we're talking about the NFL, NHL, MLB, whatever it may be, it's decided based on a record. We have too many teams. I'm going to cover this in a different video on a later date. There's too many teams trying to compete for a 12-team playoff that it can't be inclusive enough. All right, next we have head-to-head competition, a team beating an opponent directly. There is an issue here where a team beat another team, yet late in the season, the committee felt the loser of the initial matchup was better. The 2016 Penn State Nittany Lions. They will actually be mentioned a couple of times in this. They beat Ohio State, and yet Ohio State was given the nod to actually go into the playoff. Clemson ended up destroying Ohio State in that game, which further begs the question, why did Penn State not get into the playoff, even with a conference championship and a head-to-head win over Ohio State?
now I believe, didn't Penn State have 2 losses that year? Or was their second loss in the conference championship game?
They won the conference championship. I believe they went 10-2 with 1 loss outside of it and 1 loss in conference.
So Ohio State only had 1 loss, right? Like they were 11-1.
I believe that is correct.
So I think that's just an instance of like, yes, you're absolutely right. But in that case, the committee's going to resort back to, well, Ohio State only had 1 loss and Penn State had 2. But no, you're absolutely right about your point.
Penn State lost to Pittsburgh and Michigan in that season.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. Continue.
All right. Going back. So for the next one, we have strength of schedule. This might be the most fun one. There's issues here of what is a ranked win. Evan, I'll go ahead and ask you, what is a ranked win? Is a ranked win a win at the time of beating a team, or is a ranked win a win at the end of the season based on that team's ranking?
It's kind of a hard one. Personally, I think it's a ranked win at the time that they are ranked, because presumably they are better at that moment, whether they end the season ranked or not. They may have the injury. They may have a lot of other things that go on.
Howie?
I agree with Evan, and let me tell you why. So I was thinking about this today, and originally I was the other way. You should be ranked. Ranked wins should count based on where the team is ranked at the time of the rankings. But let me tell you how that doesn't make sense. So let's say a top-ranked Alabama team beats, or let's say a top 10 ranked Alabama team beats a number 20 LSU. Okay, so you get to the rankings the next week. You don't know if LSU is still going to be ranked at that point. So you pretty much have to rank LSU, see if they're ranked. Are they going to drop to 24? Are they going to drop out? Before you can then say, okay, that counts as a ranked win for Alabama. So you can't, like, that's a case where you would have to rank the back half of the top 25 before you can do the top. It's kind of like a catch-22.
Vanderbilt didn't beat a number 1 Alabama.
No, they did, because their current.
Can I give a different example?
Sure, go ahead.
Might also
Yeah.
help prove your point,
Yeah.
Joey. Look at Army, right? Army was a top, well, top 12. Let's say that. I think they might have been even a little bit higher. They lost 1 game knocked out of the top 25. They're now back in, but I mean that was only after they played their last game after everybody else finished up their regular
Yeah.
seasons.
I think the idea of how many current ranked teams did you beat is the most ideal situation. I just think there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get there.
And also the point that I made earlier, you have two different ranking systems. You got the AP poll for 90% of the season, and then the college football playoff for.
But the AP poll
last
doesn't
one.
actually mean anything.
Exactly. So
it doesn't.
it's when you're talking ranked teams, are you talking AP or are you talking football playoffs?
So this is the exact problem that strength of schedule actually represents. The committee has never actually defined what a strength of schedule is. Is the strength of schedule at the time of beating a team? Is it at the end of beating it, at the end of the season? What exactly is it? That criteria is left vague. Something like the BCS actually baked that in and had a mathematical way of calculating how good or how bad a team actually was. The BCS had its own faults, and they try and bring it back. But it very well worked for having a legitimate metric in order to actually calculate where these teams were and how they should be laid out.
And Cameron, to that point, we already talked about how soft Indiana was this year, how soft their schedule was. But look at their schedule from a standpoint of this is August. They had the two teams that played in the national championship on their schedule as well as Ohio State. Now, we didn't know Washington and Michigan were going to be garbage. But when you start the season, you look at Indiana's schedule and you're like, that's a tough schedule. They're not winning any of those. So hindsight's 2020.
Indiana's in a unique case, but strength of schedule should absolutely be included when choosing a team. An 11-1 program with no ranked wins should not be in there over a team that has played 4 or 5 ranked teams and looked good, even with a couple of losses down the stretch. There's nothing to prove that they can play in that moment.
Yeah. And I like your point about the BCS. I was going to definitely mention that later on, but for all the flaws the BCS had, it was a formula that gave you an answer. And having a formula like that can be a part of the equation. I think where it didn't work was the entire equation. But I think analytics have a big part to play in stuff like this. And I think there's definitely a place for something of a BCS type.
So let's go ahead. We're going to dive back into the BCS. Let's look at the last 2 items that we have. So number 4 is conference titles, recognizing a team that has won a conference title. This is a bogus piece, if you ask me. This is basically saying if you win a conference title, then you're automatically in. Nobody should be automatically in for winning. Clemson, case in point, this year, you didn't need to be there just because you won a conference title. You had 3 losses. You lost by 31 points to Georgia in week 1. You don't need to be in this game. You don't need to be in the playoff. I do not care about the ACC representation.
Yeah, this was only, if I may, this was only put in there for the people that were too scared that the conference titles would be nothing after the 12-team playoffs. It's the same people that argued that the entire season wouldn't mean anything if you had a 12-team playoff.
Why are we playing conference titles?
Why are we?
Why can't we just play 12 games, and then the 12 best teams are ranked? Like, why do we need a conference title? It's another trophy, I guess. It's another banner.
It's a conversation probably for its own, Joey, if I'm being honest. The question around the legitimacy of having a conference title in general is probably one that shouldn't frankly exist in the future. And maybe in a couple of years we don't see it. There's reasons behind that logic that I think we can probably go into.
I think it made more sense when we had divisions in the conference, but now that all these conferences are going away from divisions, like, what's really the point?
Yep, agreed. Now, my last one is my favorite one, the eye test. The eye test is a vague test with little to no defined basis beyond trying to find justification beyond what can be analytically determined. Now, that is my own personal definition of what the eye test is. The eye test basically says, I think so and so is better than so and so. There is nothing there that defines anything.
Pure opinion.
Correct.
I I think real quickly, I think the eye test is in there because they want people to know that the committee members are watching these games. You see
Why is
pictures.
strength of schedule in there?
Well, because you're right, but
Well,
if you look at it,
I mean, to that point, that's why it's the last criteria.
yeah, I mean, look at Alabama against my alma mater, USF this year. USF was down by 2 up until the final 5 minutes of that game, but you wouldn't know it because Alabama scored like 4 touchdowns in the final 2
100
minutes.
points in the last minute. Yeah.
So if you just look at that box score, you're just gonna say Alabama blew out another team. Like you don't really. So I think the eye test is eye candy for them. I totally agree. Who's to say what team looks better than the other? But
I
I
would like to have seen Shador and Travis Hunter play in this if they're the eye test.
yeah, true. I think it's just more of the committee's way of saying, hey, we're watching these games.
Which they still have no justification to determine. So let's go ahead and pivot into the next major part. This is the meat of it. So how is the playoff committee actually compromised? Per the committee's official site, the committee's task will select the best teams, rank the teams for inclusion in the playoff, and then assign the teams to the playoff bracket and their respective game sites. There are 13 individuals that represent the college football playoff organization and have the right to be able to rank these teams. Now, what defines a person's actual ability to make these decisions is where this becomes my favorite word in this episode, vague. There's no clear criteria. They basically say that these people just have a good understanding of the sport and then throw them in. So there's some of them that I absolutely see justification with. There's some of them that I don't. So I'm going to start going through these 13 individuals. I'm going to do this relatively quickly, and I have grouped them. I have most qualified, questionable conflict of interest, and then why are you here? And I'm going to leave some interpretation room in there for the two of you to jump in as I'm going through.
Okay.
So first and foremost, we have Chris Alt. He's a retired previous head coach and staff of Nevada and UNLV. No issue with that. Representative of the G5 and the Mountain West. No issue there. We have Chet Gladchuk, a retired, and again, these are the most qualified people for what I feel is in this role. He's a retired former AD or athletic director of Navy Houston Boston College, as well as serving on a couple of other different places and having attended the University of Houston. I think these are two great representations of how exactly these people should be selected. They clearly have at least some knowledge on how the sport works. We have a coach, we have an athletic director that is not currently serving. We have Gary Pinkel. He is a retired head coach from Toledo in Missouri, attended Kent State. So again, we have a head coach. I think he has a good allegiance to the sport. Jim Grobe, retired head football coach, Ohio, Wake Forest, and Baylor, and attended the University of Virginia. And then last but not least, from my alma mater as well, we have Mike Riley, who's a retired head football coach from Oregon State and Nebraska, and attended the University of Alabama. I didn't say that. Any questions about the individuals that I felt deserved to be there? I felt that being a former athletic director, being a former coach, especially with multiple teams on your resume, felt like a compelling reason that that person should understand how the sport works. How does that sound to y'all?
Yeah, I
That's the
agree.
that's the most complete representation of pretty much the entire country.
Yep.
All right, let's get into some questionable conflicts of interest here. So we have Ward Manuel, the currently sitting athletic director for the University of Michigan. That sounds kind of weird. Connor Stallions would agree. So his only other experience was at the University of UConn. Guys, sitting as an active athletic director not a little bit of conflict of interest here? I'm going to pause for a moment while I continue to dive through this. Next, we have Mac Rhodes, who's the vice president and director of intercollegiate athletics at the University of Baylor. He also attended Arizona and Indiana, and he served on staff at Missouri, Houston, and Akron. Now, I think he has a better representation, at least, across different schools, but I don't see a reason that a currently sitting athletic director, again, should be on the board. What do y'all think?
It is a complete conflict of interest all the way around.
All right. Joey?
I agree. I mean, the only way it's not a conflict of interest is if they're from a school that's not going to make the playoffs. Like, I don't know.
So here's the thing. Also,
I'm conference money unless you're SMU and didn't buy into the television conference.
If it was like New Mexico State or something, or FIU.
This isn't.
And that's what I was going to say. You know, I think at the end of the day, a lot of these people are supposed to recuse themselves, right?
Yeah.
But let's be honest. If you're an athletic director for somebody and you make the college football playoffs, you're getting a bonus. I mean,
Exactly
there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Like even if you don't get it now, you're going to reap those benefits later on.
So here's a weird one to think about. Let's say the University of Alabama athletic director who's tied to the state. It is a state-held job. The University of Auburn has the potential to go into the playoff. There is a benefit financially to Auburn making the playoff, and you're absolutely going to vote for it to see them get in so that you get a bonus and the state actually receives that bonus.
Yeah.
You see,
I
minor issue.
I mean, you got to hope that the other people in the room are like calling them out for this kind of stuff, right?
Oh, you know, let's hear about the other people in the room.
When we're leaving it to hope, I have zero hope within the within this committee. So next, we have the director of athletics at Virginia, Miss Carla Williams. So she attended the University of Georgia, and she served in admin roles at Vanderbilt and Florida State. So obviously we have ACC ties and SEC ties here. Again, actively sitting director at the University of Virginia. Are we seeing an issue here?
Yeah. I think the key is actively sitting.
Next, we have David Saylor, athletic director at Miami of Ohio. This
Actively?
one is actively recognized 3 times for the best athletics department in the Mid-American. Congratulations. This is what's written on the college football playoff site. Again, I think it's fantastic to run a program well. I do not think that the right place for you to sit is on a board that is deciding who gets to go to the playoff. That doesn't sound like justification.
Now, not only that, deciding how your college, I mean, let's be honest here, college football is what brings so much of a majority of the money to most of the colleges.
To the larger schools for sure.
Yeah.
Now, in David Saylor's defense, he has attended, I think, more or served in more capacities than anyone else. South Dakota, Rice, Oregon State, Bowling Green, Houston, Hartford, Georgia, and UConn. By the way, you may be hearing Georgia a couple of times here as well.
Oh boy.
Saying Carla and now David Saylor. All right. So moving on to Hunter Yurachek, the athletic director at the University of Arkansas. Starting to see a trend here. Yeah, so he was an AD at Coastal Carolina, Houston, Akron, Virginia, Western Carolina, Vanderbilt, Wake Forest, mostly ACC, SEC schools. But again, sitting athletic director. Now, one thing I did go back and actually note, we do have a representative from all Power 4 conferences and the G5. The issue that I have is that they are actively serving, regardless of what their past is, they're just actively serving in these roles. And then, do y'all have any questions before I continue?
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
All right. So next we get into the why are you here, which may be the best category of them all. And we have 3 individuals that found themselves in this very said category. And by the way, I do not want to take anything from the integrity of these individuals. I'm sure they have plenty of it. It's just I don't feel that what's provided by the internet and by our research, is able to provide enough justification for them to sit in this role. Randall McDaniel has never served in a college football role. He attended the University of Arizona State, went to the NFL, won the Walter Payton Man of the Year, and has done literally nothing else to the college football world to justify his existence in the College Football Playoff Committee. Nothing on Wikipedia, nothing anywhere. He's a good person. I love that. Fantastic. Is that justification to be able to decide who makes the playoff?
No.
Will Shields, nothing college football related. Attended the University of Nebraska. He's the most decorated offensive lineman in college football history, with his biography mentioning both his amazing run in college football and the NFL. He also won the Walter Payton Man of the Year award. Amazing. I suppose Tom Brady should be... Oh, go ahead.
I just gotta say, I do love that you say nothing college football related, followed by the most decorated college football athlete. But
he's a college football athlete. That doesn't mean that Derrick Henry should be serving on the college football voting board for who gets in the playoff. Again,
given this criteria, maybe, but
Alabama would make it at 8-5 if that was the case.
By being memorable, I suppose Tom Brady should be in there as well. By that same justification.
I would love to see Tom Brady.
All right, so we have an agreement. We just want to see guys that we know the names of. I love that.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. And this last one is just going to not feel right. Kelly Whiteside is a writer who has served as a writer for the Olympics, World Cup, NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, and other collegiate sports. Sounds more like the Associated Press or AP rather than being, again, knowing where you are. She attended the University of Rutgers. That's amazing. But again, I wonder what actual experience does she have to qualify who makes the playoff? Athletic directors make sense in this role. Former coaches make sense in this role. People that know and understand the sport. And I'm not saying she doesn't understand, but I'm saying she hasn't served in that capacity of some of these other individuals. We've seen what that baseline looks like. This isn't it. What are your thoughts?
I totally agree with you. I think it's going to be impossible to keep all biases out just because a lot of people that would be involved in these decisions have so many connections across universities and conferences. But I think being retired is probably a good place to start on your resume if you want to be on the College Football Playoff Committee.
Yeah, I got a few things to say here. So, number one, love that we get to talk about this. And the only reason that all of this comes to light is because of how much chaos happened during this college football season. We would not have had to get down to the nitty-gritty of, strength of schedule, the eye test, everything like that, if teams won their games. But that didn't really happen. On the other side, are these, for some reason, the people that are not retired, are the qualifications that are may or may not be outlined somewhere, are these the only people who meet those qualifications?
Evan, I can read off what the qualifications are because this is the qualification written on the NCAA site. The group is composed of some of college football's most decorated ambassadors, including highly esteemed university administrators, former coaches, former student athletes, and sitting directors of athletics.
Yeah. So that's going to bring me to my third point. This is the only job I have ever seen that does not have a very strict, regimented, line by line qualification and mandatory qualifications that are out there. That description that you just read seems like they want to include these people, therefore we are going to outline
the eye test
everything.
Of the playoff committee. So you can decide whoever you want on the basis of deciding what you want because you want it. That's not how life works.
Who is deciding? Who is deciding who's on a committee?
It's not Nick Saban.
But who's picking these people? Because if the NCAA and college football playoff are separate entities, then who is the person picking? Who is the group picking this group? Let's go down a rabbit hole.
That is a question that is not answered, and I have tried searching for it on their site, and it is left, I think, unanswered for a good reason.
Is it ESPN?
ESPN has an agreement with the College Football Playoff Committee.
But is ESPN picking these members?
Disney.
I think we're going down a road here that we don't want to get shut down on. So
Nothing wrong with asking questions.
I think that's fair. So we kind of alluded to it. What qualifies an individual to being a part of the committee? Obviously, we went through what the determining factor is. I have no issue with the committee being selected based on decorated ambassadors and highly esteemed administrators. I think that's excellent. Cool. But there's a clear conflict of interest for many of these individuals. As we alluded to a minute ago, would it benefit Michigan to have the actively sitting athletic director, Manuel Ward, or Ward Manuel, sitting on the board? He was on the 2023 playoff committee, ironically, when the University of Michigan was dealing with the sign stealing. He's so trying to dive into rabbit holes, but this is very legitimate. He was on the committee last year.
So you just asked a question that I think is pretty much all that needs to be said. Will you benefit from X, Y, Z?
Yeah.
The answer is yes, even if it's not immediate, even if it's not the same year.
Correct.
Eventually, if your team makes the playoffs, you're getting better recruits next year. You're getting more NIL money. You're setting yourself up for more and more. It's just how it works.
These individuals aren't unbiased. And then you get into the issue of, does being a good contributing member of society and winning NFL Man of the Year validate becoming a college football playoff committee member? Again, I am all for great integrity of people. I love it. I love how these guys get back. But one doesn't equate to the other. One has nothing to do with the other. Both of Will Shields and Randall McDaniel had no association with the sport per their bio, per research, per things that have been written about them over the years. They're both incredible. They've both done excellent with their lives. But what is the leading reason to believe that they should be defining how we go? We have way better individuals that could be determining this. We have former coaches. We have former ADs. We have guys all over the place that would be way, way, way better suited to fill this. Or you can do what I've been begging for and have an analytical reason or an analytical purpose behind this that actually drives who's in the playoff rather than 13 people sitting in a room saying this is who's going to do it.
Well, Cam, would you care as much about who was on the committee if they were only one part of the equation? Like right now, these people are making the entire decision. So let's say, to your point, we had an analytical model that, combine the coaches and AP poll, and then maybe combine strength of record and strength of schedule. And then maybe you had a committee that watched the games that had some sort of a percentage of the vote that did the eye test. Would you care as much?
Name one other sport that does that.
Well, no other sports is like college football.
Why?
I mean, well, because in the NFL, you don't pick non-conference games. Like the league picks all your games for you, and they're broken down by strength of schedule. So everyone in the NFL has the same strength of schedule to start the season. And that's how every sport is. You can't do that in college football. You get your patrons.
See teams in Division I football. That knows where I'm going to go, and I'm going to avoid the conversation.
Yeah, you're going to have to do that today.
Games. I'm not. This is a future conversation. There are two teams.
So can I ask it a different way? Because here's my feelings on it. Would we care as much if the outlined criteria that is posted for these playoff committee members were not subject to opinion?
Yeah, that's called analytically selecting.
Exactly. It doesn't make sense in its current form for who gets to be on the committee. It could be Joe Schmo, who wrote one amazing article one time that was absolutely genius 10 years ago when we had a different playoff committee or we had a different selection criteria. The people that stand to, whether they recuse themselves or not, people that stand to personally profit on this kind of stuff, you can't take it out of the equation.
So here's where it gets really interesting. In every other sport in the world, there's a reason that this isn't allowed. Whether it's gambling, whether it's, selecting stocks, whatever it may be, this is insider trading, which is illegal by the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission here in the US. This is illegal. You're essentially defining who's in, and you're able to put a check in your back pocket that is paid for by the state in your pocket and get a bonus if you make it in. That is a problem. That's where this comes in. You cannot be a state-paid employee, be on the college football playoff committee, and then getting a secondary check behind the scenes. That's where this is wrong. That's where this is broken. That's the major issue. It's a gambling issue. Even if these individuals aren't getting the checks themselves, do you think they don't have boosters that are behind them? You think there aren't people behind them that are feeding into this? You think there aren't people that are very closely tied, their son, somebody super close to them that would be a beneficiary of them selecting a certain team for the right reason and they're just getting a different check in their different pocket? No.
I think biases will always play a factor.
Biases will always play
Whether you know they're playing a factor in your decision or not, they always just play a factor. I mean, your surroundings, how you grow up, where you went to school, the teams you like growing up, all those things. Even if you say, I'm not going to let those affect my decision, in a subtle way, they always do. That's plain and simple.
No, I agree with you, Joey. And I think you're right on the right track. The problem is you can't have actively sitting people that are making these decisions.
And the other problem is nobody truly understands how these people are selected and why they are selected. No. And you can't point to a group that says, or that you could say, you made these decisions for who was going to be on this. And this is why you made those decisions. There's nobody that can defend why each person is on the committee.
So
great.
I think we're all in agreement on all of this. And in the process of speeding things up, Cam, I know we're going to talk about your solution in a later episode that has off-season written all over it. That has off-season written all over it. The only hint I'm going to give viewers is that if you watch football overseas, they do this method that Cam is talking about.
Relegation.
Yes, relegation. But we can't get into that. But I do want you to sum up your overall point here before we move on to the last word.
We need a system that works. 13 people cannot decide how these teams make it into the playoff. We need an unbiased way that is not with the current group. This is wrong. And we need to restructure the playoffs so that the seeding actually makes sense. We need the best 12 teams, or we're going to end up with the same garbage that we had this year. All we want to see is the integrity of the sport continue to get better. Evan and I are some of the longest, I can't say longest, there's 90-year-olds that are watching this, but our entire lives, all we've loved is college football. This is it. There's nothing else there to really talk about. We want to see it continue to improve and get better. But right now it's insanely toxic. And quite frankly, I feel like we may be going down the gutter rather than going up.
Evan, you agree? You cool with all that?
Yeah, I just want to see clarity in how all of this is done. When the playoffs first started with the 4 teams, we came from the BCS National Championship. Not everything was wrong about how the national championship used to be during the BCS, but everybody just tried to do away with it. Again, I'm thankful for all the chaos of this year because it allows us to talk about this kind of stuff, but I want clarity. And I also want it to be known, we want the sport to be better. That's why we call this kind of stuff out. because we want to see it go for a long time. And I'd rather see changes happen now in the first year of the 12-team playoffs than 10 years from now, just like it happened, with the 14 towards the 12 teams, where everybody's just ticked off because it takes too long for controversy to actually come out.
Joey, you had an interesting point earlier. Why are there too many teams that are in the playoff?
Because, I mean, are there really 12 teams that are capable of winning it? You have the playoff to see who can win a national championship. Do we have 12 teams in here that are capable of winning a national championship? I mean, I would
12 teams, they're not in the playoff.
argue that even if you put some combination of Alabama, Ole Miss, or South Carolina in there, or even Miami, and subbed out SMU or Indiana, I don't think those teams were worthy of a national championship this year. Alabama was not worthy of it.
State.
You're right. You're absolutely right. But that just comes back to their reliance on putting an importance on conference championships. I mean, that's what this all goes at. If you get rid of conference championships, then they have no choice than to do 1 through 12. Here's the 12 best teams. It's simple as that, right?
BCS.
Again, it's like how the BCS was. Simple. 1 versus 2.
Yeah. I mean, the BCS had a lot of problems. Let's not put on our rose-colored glasses.
Yeah.
But
there was similar bias in the BCS because they never define how the appointment will actually made.
Yeah, absolutely. There was we'll go ahead. That's a different episode.
Let's move on to the last word. And speaking of biases, let's talk about a coach that had a bias in his playoff selection. That is one Lane Kiffin. So he was replying to Notre Dame's tweets when they were running up the score on Indiana. Really exciting competitive game at CFB playoff. Great job. He also had another tweet as well along the same lines. And then before I get to your guys' last word, Kirk Herbstreit also just railed on the decision to put Indiana in the playoff. Now, I will say he railed on them the next day. So hindsight's 2020. I mean, if Indiana would have won that game, we would have heard a different tune. But Lane's comments, man, I mean, I'm not really surprised.
No. Lane's got no filter. I hate to agree with Lane Kiffin. I'm a Tennessee fan, so I hate anything he does. But it really sucks to see this be the first year of the 12-team playoffs. I think myself included, I think a lot of people were really excited about how this was going to turn out. But it was just wrong.
When all 4 spreads were 10-plus points for the first week of the playoff, we knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
Kiffin's not wrong. He's just barking up the same tree we all are, and he's one of the most vocal coaches in college football. I love Kiffin because it pisses Evan off.
Now, Kiffin wouldn't have. Well, Kiffin may have still sent that tweet, but if Ole Miss was 6-6 or 7-5,
no, he would not have talked. Yeah, he's too smart for that.
Yeah. So, anyways, guys, that's Settle for Free. Cam, you did a great job. 55 minutes.
Oh,
is that it?
Which
That's
is
the lowest time he's ever talked.
Yeah, that's shorter than I thought you would be. So, guys, thanks for joining. On next week's show, we are going to be talking about the quarterfinal games, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully, we get some more competitive results. So, for another episode of Settle for Three, Joey, Cameron, what do you want to say?
Please like, share, and subscribe.
Oh,
we would love to continue making this content. Please let us know your thoughts.
Yep.
What do you disagree with? What do you agree with? What can we do better? And what would you like to hear?
And if
If anybody from the playoff committee sees this, don't shut us down.
Yeah.
Please.